So on the agency disclosure, you represent the buyer, right? So I want you to check the box that says buyer, and I want you to write Elizabeth Stuckey. Under agent, below there, that's your brokerage, which is KW Coastal Estates. Brokerage license number. If I finish before you, you can just put lines in there. I'm not going to force you to. Salesperson, put your name, your DRE number. Okay. Now in zip forms, once you fill in a field like a buyer's name or a broker name, every single document within that file is going to be populated with that. So you don't have to keep repeating yourself and writing it and writing it and writing it and writing it. Okay. Now you have to do it if you're doing it by hand. So we're just gonna skip through repetition here though. So we've done the AD, and your buyer's gonna sign this, right? So we're back to the grid. Everybody on page 1 now with the contract? Yeah. So the first thing you go is where it says date prepared. That's today's date. So write in today's date under date prepared. The buyer's name would be there. You can write that. The property to be acquired is 591 Belden Street. Okay. City is Monterey. County, Monterey. Zip code 93940. Get that information in there. Then you'll see where it says the AP number. You want to put that in here under AP number. Okay. Now keep in mind, Elizabeth Stuckey would already appear there automatically on zip forms. And we're not going to write her name anymore on this stuff, but just so you know, that's how it goes. All right. So that's the offer itself, the basic stuff. Simple, right? Agency. This is agency confirmation. This confirms that this is who's working for who. So the seller's brokerage firm is going to be Monterey Coast Realty. License number. Representing, you check the box. It says represents the seller. And the seller's agent will be Maria Finkel, who's a real live agent. You're going to put her license number, which you can find by searching the MLS. Click the box, seller's agent. Seller's broker, seller's agent. Then you're going to put your own KW Coastal Estates license number, your name, your license number. And you are the buyer's agent. Right? This is the simple part. Just make sure you get all the spelling and stuff right when you do it. Make sure you look up the numbers. Make sure those are accurate. You don't want to get the kickback from them. If I'm moving too fast, anybody tell me, okay? So we're getting down to part D, which is part C, actually, more than one brokerage represents the seller or buyer. Not the case here. If we did a co-listing or you and somebody from another brokerage are working with the same buyer, we're going to include, you're going to click the box, more than one brokerage. Zip forms will automatically throw in an ABA, which is an additional broker acknowledgement. And that would need to be filled in as well. Not the case here. D, potentially competing buyers and sellers. We talked about that earlier. That's going to automatically be checked for you. Okay. That'll automatically be included in the bundle. All right. Now we're in the fun part. And remember we talked about this. Okay. Column A, first item is purchase price. If we want to know more about it, or the buyer does, they can refer back to 5B. Most likely they'll ask you questions and not refer to anything. So we're going to make an offer of, we said it's listed at 980. We're going to offer what, 960? So let's write that in there. If it was all cash, we would check this box right there. And by doing that, it's going to automatically say no appraisal and no loan contingency. Now, it's not all cash, so I'm going to uncheck it. Second item, close of escrow. There's a choice. Days after acceptance, like 30 days, 45 days after, or you can do a date. There's advantages to either or. If the buyer just wants 30 days, because that's, or 45 days, we'll say that's how much time they need to close, put in days. The reason you do that, sometimes these things take a week or more to negotiate, and it still will say the same 45 days. By the time you get under contract, there's only 30 days left or 35 days left. You may be tight on time. So, but if you write in days, it's days after it's accepted. Now, you might need to close on a very specific date, like maybe your house is going to close on that date, or maybe something else is going to happen. You're going to be leaving international travel at a certain date. Then you're going to write in a date. In this case, let's put in, it's standard 30 days is pretty the most normal, but we're going to put in 45 days because your buyer needs just a little bit of extra time to get things under, her affairs in order. Okay. All right. A lot of these items are default. You don't have to do anything to it, but you have choices to modify it. Okay. We're on C, expiration of offer. By default, you deliver this to the listing agent, and they need to respond by 5 p.m. 3 days after. So if you deliver to them today, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, okay, they have till Saturday, but Saturday falls on a weekend. So now they have till Monday at 5 p.m. But we're just going to keep it at 3. Unless, now, if you wanted to push it up and the buyer's anxious and you're afraid when other offers are coming, you can shorten that up. But be careful. Be careful when you do that. And talk to the listing agent too, because be careful about pushing the buyer here. You're going to have plenty of opportunity to push a buyer later when you're looking for repairs and credits and things. But so we're going to keep it a default. Initial deposit amount. Let's go with 28. $28,800, which is 3%. It calculates the 3% for you.
You filled it in.
Wait,
in the
wrong one.
loan
Wrong
amounts
one.
Field.
Wrong one.
Yeah.
Wrong one. 28,000. Oops. 2.92%. Never mind. 28.8. I'm sorry. There we go. Okay. By default, that deposit, 28.8, which is 3%, would be wire transferred to the title company within 3 business days. Now, if you want to shorten it up, you can. Make it 2 business days. Make it 1. Maybe you need 10. But there's where you can modify it if necessary. Next, if it's an increased deposit, we went over that. We click that, and that form will populate. Now we're on E1, the loan amount. Okay. It's going to be an 80-20 loan. So 80% of the 960 is 768. Okay. It'll calculate to 80% for you. Fixed rate. If it's an adjustable rate, then you're going to click this box. If it's not, which is not this time, just leave it alone. Okay. Now, interest rate. Why would I want to put, like it says, not to exceed? Interest has been in the high 6s, right? So what if I say, not to exceed 7%? Why would I put that in there? Why wouldn't I just let it go?
Watching out for your buyer's interest there by, not obligating her to a higher interest rate.
Yeah. Yeah. So if, let's say that all your contingencies are gone except loan. You finally got loan approval. That's all you have left for contingencies. And the market changed. Now it's 8.5%. You say, I can't do that. I can't do it anymore. But you're still qualified. Well, you may not be able to cancel for the loan contingency now. It's protection. Now, as far as points to obtain that rate, most standard is 1%. 1 point. Don't put 2, 3, 4. If it's by default, it's conventional loan. If it's not, if you click FHA, VA, maybe it's seller financing, maybe it's something different. If you click FHA, the FHA form that's required will attach to the contract automatically. If you click VA, that form will attach automatically. And if it's FHA or VA, you're going to deliver the list of lender required repairs within 17 days by default, or a different number if you want to do that. In this case, it's not FHA or VA. Okay. Additional amount, let's say that it's 80-20, but you can't afford 20% down payment. You can only afford a 10%. So maybe you're going to do a second loan, second deed of trust for 10% and only put 10% down. And you're going to do the same process here as you would. Or maybe it's going to be the seller's going to finance 10% of it. Okay. In this case, there is no second loan. It's just a one single loan at 80-20. We're going to keep it simple. Now we're down to E3, occupancy type. Why it's in with the loan stuff? It's because of the fact that if this is done knowingly wrong, it could be lender fraud. So primary by default. Otherwise, it's either secondary or investment. Okay. Now the Zip Forms does the math. The balance of down payment is 163.2. Purchase price total is 960. Okay. And if you haven't ever filled out a contract before, you'll see at the top left here where the property address is going to be on the left of every single page. It gets filled in automatically, which it won't on your paper. And so will the date, just so you know. All right. Now we're on part G, which is seller payment to cover buyer expenses and costs. Okay. So seller credit to buyer. There's three ways they can apply credit. The first way is a seller credit towards closing costs. Let's say the buyer can't quite afford it and he wants some help. In this case, they want $5,000 for closing costs. So write in $5,000. Additional seller credit terms. Keep in mind that we're not on commission here at all. Maybe a carpet allowance. Maybe money to build the fence that doesn't exist yet. The seller agrees to do it. If you're going to put anything there, check with the lender to make sure that the lender's okay with any additional credit terms. Don't just do it. Okay, we're not going to do any in this one. Okay, this one, G3. Okay, seller payment to buyer's obligation to basically the seller paying your buyer's obligation of commission. And most of the time it's click that box, right? And let's say that your BRBC is 2.5%. Okay. So that's in there. And so you're asking the seller to pay the 2.5% of the final purchase price towards your buyer's obligation of commission. Simple. Used to be an extra form that went with that. No more. Now, H1, verification of all cash. If it's all cash, the best practice is attach that verification of funds with the offer. And that's the default. If you need more time, it's 3 days, check here, or a different number of days. Best practice, attach it to the offer. If there's a loan, you're going to have to, you want to attach verification of down payment and closing costs. Attach to the offer, best practice. If you need more time, click it, but sellers don't like that. Verification of the loan application, critical. Best to attach it to the offer. Okay. Then it's going to say, what kind of qualification is it? Is it a pre-qualification? Is it a pre-approval? Or is it full underwriting pre-approval? In this case, we'll call it pre-approval. So we check that box. And you'll notice we're not checking any of this stuff above because we're going with the default. Okay, we're down to the next section, J, final verification of condition. By default, it's 5 days. You can leave that alone. But actually, let's say that Mrs. Stuckey or Miss Stuckey can't be in town until 3 days before closing. So let's make that 3. Assignment request, if she was going to make a request to assign the contract and add somebody later or whatever, she doesn't know yet, but her ability to make a request, she has 17 days already. She might want to say, well, I'm not really sure if my Aunt Jane is going to do it. I need 20 days. That's what she would mark there if need be, but that's not the case today. Contingencies. Okay. A lot of these are with our default unless we choose to shorten them or lengthen them. If you leave it at default, you don't have to do anything. If you shorten them or lengthen them, there's stuff you got to do. Loan by default at 17 days, we'll leave that alone. Or you could remove it completely. Maybe you got fully underwriting pre-approval, all that, and you just you want to make the seller happy to accept your offer. You can check that. I don't recommend it though. Appraisal contingency, 17 days is default, or you can remove it or you can change it. The other down here on this part, appraisal contingency based upon appraised value at a minimum of purchase price, or let's say you're in multiple offers and on that 980 house you offer $1 million. And the seller says, well, it's not going to appraise for that. You say, well, if it appraises for at least 980, then that's fine. So you click it here and you would put the 980 there. Not to be used in this particular contract though. Still with contingencies, investigation of property, they have 17 days. Let's stick with that for now. A lot of times I see it shortened to 10 days, 8 days. If you're the only offer on the table, why would you do that? Informational access to properties by default 17 days. Keep in mind, informational access is not a contingency. That's like saying, I need information, I need measurements. I need to know, a little bit more about the property. My contingencies are all wrong, but I want the right to have access to come in and maybe measure for furniture, that sort of thing. Okay, insurance contingency, 17 days by default. Let's leave it alone. Review of seller, 17 days. We're going to leave all these alone. The prelim, 17 days. All this is a common interest disclosures, which are HOA stuff, which we don't have an HOA in this one. A review of leased or liened items by default, 17. If the buyer had to sell their property first in order to buy this house, then be careful. This is L9. So many agents forget to check this. Check the box. Car form COP attached. You check the box in zip forms, it attaches the form, and you have no choice but to fill it out. Okay? Don't do all this separately. Very experienced agents don't check this. They just rush through this part. Time of possession by default upon notice of recording. Or you can make it something different. Or if there's a tenant that's staying, you're going to have attached the TOPA, the TOPA, right? And that's where the terms are agreed to. Okay. Seller occupied, if the seller is going to stay afterwards. Typically the seller is going to be gone by close of escrow, or if you want to do the 29 days or less, you check that. Or if it's 30 or more days, you check that. We went over those forms. If it's 29 or less, it's the SIP. If it's 30 or more, it's the residential lease after sale, RLAS. Okay. If it's going to be anything occupied by tenants, or anybody other than the seller, maybe the seller's mom. Okay. This happens. This causes problems too. You got to do the TOPA. If anybody's staying after besides, at all, like a tenant of any way, shape, or form, even if it's the mom who's never paid rent in her life, TOPA. Okay. Document delivery, etc. Sell delivery of documents, they have 7 days. Okay. Smart sellers will give it to you before you ever write the offer, so you know what you're getting. Sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions, 5 days by default. Time to pay fees for ordering HOA docs, 3 days by default. This is just actions. We're not saying who pays for it or anything yet. Install smoke detector, water heater, etc. within 7 days by default. Evidence of representative authority. That means somebody else signing on behalf of. You got to show evidence that you can actually sign for that entity within 3 days after acceptance. Okay. We didn't fill out anything, but we did go through them, each one as you would with your buyer. Maybe not as fast as I'm talking, but do it. Inclusions, exclusions. Even though it might say that the stove's a fixture because it's attached and all that, be safe. Let's cook the stove. We want the refrigerator. The washer and the dryer would be great. Dishwasher's attached, but let's be sure. Okay, we want that. We don't want that. We do want the video doorbell. That's pretty cool. We there we go. We got it.
What's
Okay.
going on with the bathroom mirrors pre-checked?
Because there's been a lot
I
of
believe
confusion over the yeah,
uh,
over the years there's been a lot of confusion, just as there has been with window or light fixtures, where there's this really nice ornate antique bathroom mirror that the buyer sees when they preview the house and they move in, it's a Home Depot square mirror.
and
So
I believe you cannot uncheck that box.
you cannot uncheck it, but you can exclude it. See where it says unless excluded below?
Right.
Okay. So excluded might mean you don't want to write that ugly ass spa on the front porch. We don't want that. We want you to take it with you. Or anything else you want removed from the property. Now, included, I would always, if you got really nice window coverings, even though it's a fixture, it's in the contract, it's a fixture, write it down anyway. Window treatments. All window treatments. Now, the seller can counter you and say, and counter back and exclude things if he wants. And if the buyer agrees, that's fine. But that's part of the negotiation process. We're just writing the offer. So we've gone through these. We've gone through with your seller. The buyer says, you know, I really want those potted trees and shrubs out there too. Choose. Click it. And anything else you can think of. And keep in mind, if there's more excluded items that'll fit in these 3 boxes, it'll just keep writing because you'll get what's called an overflow addendum on that stuff. Okay. All right. Allocation of costs. Who pays for what? Natural hazard zone disclosure report. Typically, that's the seller. Okay. You can select who you want here. Let's just say we're going to use JCP. Go on optional wildfire disclosure report. You can pick. That's the only one I believe that does it. And who's going to pay for it if you want that. We're not going to ask for that here. We're keeping it very simple. If there's any other reports that you're thinking of, like if you want to be safe, like the Monterey City report, even though that's included here, you can write it down just to be safe. Term on that is a RPI, Monterey RPI inspection. Let's write it in there. Okay. We want the seller to pay for that. Smoke alarm, CO2 detectors, water heater bracelets, sellers, most typical. Government required point of sale inspections and reports. That's really this one, but there's confusion sometimes. That's why we wrote it there, and we're going to put it here. The seller would provide anything that's required. Government required point of sale corrective actions. That would be like the sewer lateral. That'd be like the water fixtures, etc. Most typically, it's the seller that you're going to ask to pay for that stuff. If you have multiple offers and you want to be, you know, your buyers, I want it at any cost, maybe you write the buyer pays for this stuff. Okay. Escrow fees. Typically, those are split. You can either do both and put split 50-50, or you can just put each to pay their own fees. Escrow holder, Chicago will say, Chicago title. And I prefer to also, under Chicago title, put in the address and put in the escrow officer that you're requesting too. I'm not going to do it here because we're not going to take the time to write it. But the more specific you get, they can use Chicago title in Sacramento. So just be careful there. Put in the one that they want. At the very least, put Chicago title Monterey or wherever you want it to be. Okay. Owner title insurance policy. Typically the seller. Okay. Buyer's lender life insurance policy. By default, it's the buyer. Okay. Unless you otherwise agree to it. County transfer tax. Typically the seller. There is no city transfer tax there. We're not in an HOA, but if you were, the seller pays for the fee to prepare disclosures. Buyer pays for the certification fee by default. The transfer fees, I always like to split them 50-50, but you can have the seller do it or the buyer will do it. No private transfer fees here on this property. no additional fees. Home warranty. Okay. Yeah. Let's say we want the seller to pay for home warranty and we want, let's say, American Home Shield. And it costs not to exceed, I'm a little out of date on this, but we'll say 550. So up to 550. If you want to put additional coverage like swimming pool, spa, things that aren't on the plan, the typical plan, you want to write that in here. Okay.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
excuse me, sorry. What could you give an example of what a private transfer fee is exactly?
Let's say you're in a private plan unit development or something to that effect. And
Like
pardon me?
East Garrison has them
Yeah.
in our county. So they have a 0.1%, which is on every sale. That's a private transfer fee. Go ahead.
Yeah. And you'll never, in a lot of cases, if that's a brand new home, new construction, you as an agent, if you sell a house that's new construction being built, you may not even be, you won't even participate in that part because the builders, the developers are actually doing the contract with the buyer. They don't use this contract. They use their own contract.
It's the resale, though, right?
Yeah, the resales, yeah, those are different. Yeah, but we're not going to go into the new construction part today. Now, the buyer has the option to waive it. I don't recommend it. Here's the thing about home warranty. On a home warranty, it really protects the seller more than it protects the buyer. Because the buyer moves in 5 days later, one of the burners doesn't work. First thing is calls the seller. Hey, that burner didn't work. You didn't tell me. What's going on? Now, just call the home warranty company. They'll fix it. Yeah, there's a deductible. They have to pay to get the person out. But it usually goes for a year. The water heater stops working, that sort of thing. But it's really, from the seller's standpoint, it prevents a lot of harassing phone calls over little things, little repair things, or even big repair things. Okay. Other terms, if there's any other terms you want to add in, this is where you put them. That's if you know, be careful what you're putting in is applicable and legal to the contract. Any questions, you can always reach out and ask. Okay.
Mike, can I bring up something right here? Do you mind if I talk about something right now? Or
Oh, absolutely. No, go ahead. Absolutely.
So Mike, what I've come across, and maybe you can tell us this was a logical concern on the Q3. If we write in the city of Monterey RPI report, like you have done, make it the sole responsibility. The presumption that the corrective action items under Q6 are an obligation. I've had agents say, no, you can get the city not to require that, especially the sewer lateral, for example. They just require the lateral to be inspected, not the corrective action. A buyer can assume that. So what I've had to do to cover that is down in R, I reference Q3, A and B above. Seller will complete any required recommendations or required repairs on these two items. Now, is that something we shouldn't do? Is it overkill, or do you think we should do that?
I don't think that's overkill. It might be accomplishing the same thing because required is, I mean, maybe go specifically because some things can be done afterwards and some things can be transferred to the buyer.
Yes.
But no, there's no such thing as overkill on this. I think that's a great way to do it. Just like you said.
Thanks, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give that verbiage again, Jen?
Just
Just say seller.
Okay.
Is required.
storage required to complete any repairs or recommendations on city inspection report. The sewer lateral.
Okay, now we're back to page 4. If there's any addenda we need to add, and keep in mind, if it was tenant occupied and you check the box above, this would be checked as well automatically. It carries forth. But if it doesn't make it to the contract, the forms are still going to be required. But we're not going to go into any of this. Like, it's not going to be a probate. It's not a manufactured home. It's not a backup offer. So on. We don't have a septic or a propane, any of that sort of thing. But those, if we need to include those in there, we do. If it does have a septic, click that. See that little circle there? That just added the septic addendum to the documents, just so you know. Okay. You'll see that, like this, for example, they're already checked. These are part of the bundle. These are already checked because they're part of the bundle, so you can't uncheck them. Okay. Now let's keep on going past the stuff that we've already reviewed. way past. Two. Okay, this is the liquidated damages. Keep in mind, these are both voluntary. These are not required. They're not required to initial this in order to have a contract. But if the buyers initial it and the sellers don't, the buyers have the option of saying, okay, we're not going to do liquidated damages, or they can counter the seller saying that no, I want liquidated damages. And they can counter back and forth till they come up to an agreement. The same with arbitration. Okay, just remember those two that are not required, but most people do it. Okay, down to part 33, the offer. Everybody on that page?
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
if someone decides not to sign the arbitration and the liquid damages, does another form pop up that excludes them from that part?
No other form
Okay.
pops up. No,
Okay.
but it's up to the receiving party. If the seller accepts the offer as written, where the buyer's initial and the seller doesn't, you don't have a clause. The seller either but the buyer can negotiate back, say no, I want that initial. It's almost to the buyer's advantage to have the liquidated damages because it limits their risk to 3% or their deposit paid. On the other hand, it's good for the seller because the seller, if the buyer just defaults on the contract and the buyer just messed it up, the seller might be, get all that money, all that 3%. But there's nothing pops up automatically there. No. So on the offer itself, an entity buyer, we talked about that. And you don't need to attach any extra form for this unless it's done after the contract, in which case there's one called an RCSD. But in this case, if it is an entity, you're going to click this and you see how it opens this field up. You're going to put in the name of the trust or the LLC or whatever it is, and then the name of the person who can sign for that trust or LLC or whichever it is. And then that becomes the signer for the duration. But that's not the case today. Elizabeth's name is here. Okay. And she's the only signer as a buyer. So great. Now, this is the seller page. We're going to skip past that and go to the broker section. You want to fill this out completely. Okay, you're going to put your name, your license number, I've already done that, so mine's already filled in automatically, so I haven't entered it twice. Your brokerage name, your address of the brokerage, the city. And a lot of people, they don't bother to fill this out completely. And it's so annoying to a lot of other agents that are getting the offer. So don't be annoying right off the bat.
Well said. Don't be annoying.
1, 2, 3. Put in your email, your phone number. Just grab that one. Okay. Now, the same holds true to the other office. This is really annoying if you don't fill in their information for them. That's right there on the MLS sheet, right? So put in the address of Monterey Coast Realty, which is P.O. Box Drawer C. City, that's Carmel. Obviously, California.
Does everyone use the connect?
Should we go these-
Is it auto-populates?
the zip there. Put her email down. Maria and put her phone number down. It's so nice. You get an offer like that, it's like, oh wow, I don't have to put that in when I respond to it. Perfect. Because the title company's going to need that too, right? Okay. And this part here, this is for the escrow company to fill out. So, and once again, if there's more than one agent from the same firm, let's say you're working this buyer with another agent from KW, our office, then you need to add what's called an AAA, Additional Agent Acknowledgement Form. Click that and it populates it automatically. It's very simple to fill out. We won't go through it today. And if more than one brokerage represents the buyer. Then you need an ABA, additional brokerage acknowledgement. Okay. By default, your designated email address, delivery address is this one that you put in. If it's going to be something different, you write it in here. If they want a different delivery method for documents and communication, then you do a form called DEDA, delivery, and you attach that. We're not going to do that today. Okay. So we filled out the offer. The seller is going to get the offer and they're going to look at it and they're going to say, wow, I got an offer, $960 on my $980. This is great. I love this offer, with a couple of exceptions. So the seller, their option is I'm going to counter. So they're going to sign it, but they're going to click here. Seller's accepted is subject to the attached counter offer. So the seller needs to click that box. Okay. Then the seller, you'll have already put their name in. John Silver and Mary Silver. Okay. They're going to sign it and you're going to get the signed offer back typically. And you look at that. I got in the mail. I got a counter offer from the seller. Sometimes they'll just send the counter offer and they won't sign an initial the full contract. They just give you this. That's not best practice, but that's okay. Because if you sign their counter offer or counter back, the contract, you still have a contract. Pick your battles. Pick your battles. But they should. Best practice is provide the whole signed everything back along with the counter offer. So the counter offer basically said they accept it subject to. Okay. Counter offer number 1, blah, blah, blah. This is what they want to counter back. And the way they counter it is they refer to the paragraph. If you look at your thing, AP number, we wrote it down wrong. So they're correcting it. Oh, shoot. So all of a sudden we're like, oh, you guys weren't careful. So per 3A purchase price is $980. They're countering that. Close of escrow, which is 3B on your grid, per 3B COE to be 30 days, not 45. For the credit, seller credit per 3G1, which is the field where seller credit is, they're only going to offer $2,500. Per 3Q6 on the cost of government required point of sale corrective actions, they're saying not to exceed $10,000. Buyer to pay any additional cost because they don't want to have an open checkbook for something that might be wrong there. Okay. So, and they haven't attached anything to it. They're not saying they could have written in, well, seller will stay in possession for 20 days and they attach this. They're not doing any of that. So, expiration of offer by default is 3 days after you get it delivered to you, but the seller's shortening that up. They want to do 5 o'clock on the 28th. They're giving you 2 days. So you get this offer. You're going, oh, wow. Well, okay, let's respond to it. So you respond to it. It's buyer off counter number 1. And we'll say that today is the 28th. It's a counter to the seller's counter by default. Okay. Property address is filled in. The buyer and seller is filled in. Terms. Okay. What do we want to counter here? Let's say for 3A purchase price, I'd like to do on a counter. I like to put number each thing I want to counter like that, 2 spaces. I'll tell you why in a second. So per 3A purchase price is, well, let's meet in the middle at $965. Okay. I'm gonna go to the next one and it's going to be item 2, 2 spaces per 3G1 seller credit to buyer is $5,000. I need the 5,000. Okay, that's all I want to counter back. And the reason I do 1 and 2 because it's separate. So you see a counter offer that has all this stuff bundled together with hardly any separation. It's like a mess. This makes it really clear. If you run out of lines, so what? because you get an overflow addendum automatically gets created. It's just that, once again, a little courtesy for the other side to make it a little more clear for them. So you're going to counter back on price and you're going to counter back on the credit. Everything else you accept. Okay. So on the seller counter offer, when you sign it, we're going back up to that. You're going to accept it. You're going to check that box subject to the attached buyer counter offer number 1. Your buyer's going to sign it and date it, right? The DocuSign. You've written your counter offer. You signed it here. So Elizabeth has signed it. You're going to send it along with the signed seller counter offer or everything they've given you back and hope they accept it. If they'll either counter it or they'll accept it or they'll just say, I'm done. Okay. But let's say that you want to give them a different time frame on expiration. You want to do 5:00 p.m. on the 29th, or there's no 29th. Let's say the 2nd. Keep in mind today would be the 28th. So, and let's say the seller responds late. He accepts your counter or they counter back and they accept it late. That's okay. Because they sign it either with another counter or not. And if they send it late, then you sign here, or Elizabeth Stuckey will sign here, saying I'm okay with it coming in late. So it's still ratified and accepted, even though it arrived back late. Okay. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. I know this is kind of old school for a lot of you who've written offers before, but I tell you, you can't review it enough. And I know we did go over time, longer than we thought, but I do hope you got something from it. And I'll say this is just part 1. Part 2 is getting out there and writing contracts. The best way to learn is to write. If you don't have anybody to write for, then print up a couple of listings and just write some pretend contracts and just get really familiar with it. And the best way to do that is not on zip form. The best way is to do it by hand, because when you're doing it by hand with a blank slate, it's making you think about what you're writing down. When I got into the business 21 years ago, my broker gave me 3. There's a triplicate contracts where there's no zip forms. And gave me 3 listings. Said write 3 contracts, and I did, and it worked. It worked very well. So,
Hey, Mike.
yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The contingencies, do they just fall off after 17 days, or do we have to release them, or do they automatically fall off?
No, they do not automatically fall off. They will remain until they're removed in writing. And you remove them with that form, contingency removal, CR/B for buyers, CR-S for sellers. But until they're removed in writing, they still remain.
Okay,
It doesn't
great.
mean,
Okay.
does not mean the buyer can go in and do physical inspections after 17 days. It just means that contingency is there.
Okay.
Okay.
All
And they can
right.
cancel with no penalty.
Okay. That makes sense. Second question I had is that, so if somebody is purchasing a property and they purchase a property in October, and I didn't tell them that taxes were coming up in December, and all of a sudden they've got taxes that are coming up because taxes come twice a year. How do we, what is the best way to let people know that taxes are going to be twice a year and you are responsible for them?
Your job is not to do the taxes, arrange the taxes. If you have the seller, for example, it's their job to know, right? Because they get the bill, or that's probably in their payment. If you are the buyer, great, tell them when the tax schedule is, but all that's going to be dealt with in escrow under proration. When you're explaining the contract, there's the portion in the contract that we went through called prorations. Let them know how prorations work. Let them know that if we're 2 months in to 6 months of prepaid taxes, then the seller's liable for 2 of the months, the buyer's liable for 4 of the months. So the buyer's going to have to write a check at escrow to pay those 4 months of taxes. And the seller, if they've already prepaid the full 6 months, they'll get that money to them. And keep in mind, it's not such a big problem in California, but it used to be where I was in Texas, and it could be again, is tax rates can change. So, if you're prepaying 6 months of taxes and the rates change, then the seller may be due a little bit more money back than they thought, or a little bit less money back than they thought. And I have yet to see in California where that's been a point of discussion later on. But in some markets, in some Texas, it was always a big deal.
Okay.
But we're not in Texas.
I have a question.
Mhm.
If the agent wants to pay for the home warranty, how does that get reflected on the RPA?
Other terms?
And so in, I guess in Q
At the-
18.
yeah. At the very bottom, we'll go to, and you know what? I was an hour behind. I thought we had 2 hours. So we went to, when I was looking at my clock. So we do have more time here. Under
Take your
R,
time.
under 3R,
Okay.
just right
So
in.
in Q8, how would you treat Q18? Just not click on anything?
You could put, just leave it alone.
Okay.
Just leave it alone. Yeah.
Okay.
And but write in other terms, buyer to pay, or list buyer agent to pay, buyer's home warranty plan with American Home Shield up to, $550, $600, whatever it's going to be. Put in the same verbiage, but put it under other terms.
So Mike, I have 3 questions.
Mhm.
So one of them, you said for the buyer's inspection waiver, you mentioned if you get an inspection and maybe the home inspector says, I recommend that you see a roofer, or I recommend a qualified electrician. Well,
Yeah.
it would seem that probably mostly every single transaction that I would do would probably have a buyer's inspection waiver, because every single home inspection says that, and most of the time they don't get that. So I would recommend as well. Okay. And then my next question was, how much higher would you go on points for E1 in the contract when
For which one?
7%? Believe it's E1 I wrote down.
Oh, on the loan amount on points, I'd go 1.
Just
Unless
one. So if
something drastic, Jeff, has anything drastically changed in the market? And then as far as interest rates, I would kind of go with what it is now. If right now is around 6.8, 6.85, whatever it's been last time I checked. And you could even put that in, put 6.85 or 7. It doesn't mean you can't go forth if it exceeds that.
Yeah.
It just means that it helps you out if you want to cancel because of that.
Okay.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
all. Thank you. And then the last question is, it's still a little confusing to the items included. It seems like curtains are always included.
They are, but it's in the contract. They're included, but do enough deals and you're going to see curtains getting replaced with the Home Depot ones. And so for me, I found it to always play that one safe and just be real sure. Sellers, keep in mind, you're relying on the listing side to educate their seller on all this stuff. And if they know what you hopefully will know and do know now, then there should be no issue. But I always go into it thinking that I got to do all the work and I got to be careful. And it takes a little bit of time to trust that other agent. That's why it's so critical with you when you write your offers. Don't put in seller to pay city transfer tax when there is none. Don't put seller to provide a city report when that city report isn't required in the city you're writing the contract on. Don't misspell anything. Don't put the wrong AP number, that sort of thing. You can gauge the other side. And if it's somebody and one thing I'll tell you, buyers and sellers come and go. You're going to work with one every 7 to 10 years, the same person, right? The agents are here every day. Those are your business partners. And you're going to work with, chances are, if you stay in this business and you're successful, you're going to work with the same agents again and again and again. And they're going to say, oh, I got to work with this guy. Oh, I got to work with her. It's going to be a mess. You want to establish that. And you also want them to establish that with you. And it's usually pretty quick and upfront with a few conversations, but yeah, be safe. It's always better to be safe. Okay. Other questions?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, this is Jeff. I got a question. So currently my listing in Pebble Beach, I have the seller. He has an old document packet of when he originally purchased the property. It looked like his closing documents. He left that behind along with an old VHS tape, which he claims to be the old inspection of when he bought it. But he hasn't confirmed it because he never bought a VHS recorder. Are those two items that I should be holding on to pass on to the new buyer, the new owner?
When in doubt, yeah. The thing is, be sure that it's the VHS isn't something that you don't want people to see.
I don't have a VHS
Yeah.
recorder. Should I go buy one?
No. But how old are the documents? How many years?
2006. So yeah, almost 20 years old.
Well, there might be one disclosure item in there that's material. There might be one thing in there, but I wouldn't pass along a VHS that I haven't looked at or I didn't know what the content was.
Yeah, Jeff, I've got a VHS, I can help you take a look at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got a VHS too.
Let's have
Okay.
Yeah.
But good advice, Mike.
But yeah,
You know what,
but
Ted?
yeah, it's like, whoa. But glad you also brought that up because there have been questions before about how old is old with an inspection. I had a property inspection, let's say 4 years ago. And, I was advised old than 3 years and hand them. It's like keep your tax returns for X amount of years, then you can toss them. I don't know. When in doubt, if it's legitimate, if it's a disclosure, put it out, because sometimes you'll see an old report that has a defect, and then the seller doesn't include that defect in their disclosures, that problem. The problem never got fixed, but it was in the inspection the seller had possession of. Now, if the seller provides that inspection, it adds a little bit of fuel to, okay, I did disclose it to you. I gave you this old inspection. That was never corrected. The buyer looks at it and may ask the question, well, what about that roof? It had 3 leaks in it. Oh, yeah, I put a new, well, let me see the evidence of that new roof, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. On that same vein, the seller has also left behind some old paint that presumably was used to paint the interior and exterior of that house. Is that something that I should make sure is discarded prior to the close of escrow, or?
I would ask the buyer, ask the buyer's agent if they want it to stay or go, because they might want it. At least if the paint's not good, they might at least be able to match the color with it. If it's dried out or something to that effect. But yeah, it's always a courtesy if you have leftover paint and stuff like that, because that kind of, it's like goes with the house. But
Right.
If it's like 90 cans of all this different turpentine and paints and chemicals and things, no, that should be cleaned up.
Got it. Thank you.
Anything else out there?
Mike, can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so first of all, I have the old VCR television in my garage because
Let's have a watch party. Let's have a watch party.
I don't want to throw in something.
I'm
I
gonna
should
bring all
throw
my
back
other
on.
VHS tapes then.
I don't either for other reasons. But anyway, I want to defend my honor on that. But anyway, and so I don't really enjoy it. So the question I have, Mike, is on the section where the brokers are filling out their information. And I've come across this a lot of times where the person representing the buyer fills out the contract, goes into the real estate broker section, puts their information, doesn't want to put the information for the other agent, which is the listing agent. And I explained that you have to put it in there. I really should put it in there, specifically the email address for the electronic delivery.
Yeah.
Because in the scenario we just did today, if we have this counter offer from the seller and you made a counter offer as the buyer back without clarifying what that address is, the contract doesn't have acceptance confirmation. You have to prove you emailed it to that address.
Yep.
So it's really not good to leave that blank. If you do it wrong, the listing agent will counter or correct it with that DEA form.
Which line is that?
Great point. Great point.
It's in the real estate box.
Yeah. Yeah, go to the real estate box there. Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that's how we communicate acceptance and all those things. So, you know,
Yeah, because you're right, and that's another reason besides being courteous is because it does by default you write in those two email addresses, then and everybody accepts, then that's the address. But if it is blank, something has to be there. Because you're right, they could say I never got it. You never gave it to me.
And if you choose the wrong address for some reason from MLS, the agent that receives it will correct it. I did a deal with CNC and they have a unique email for all their contracts, and they just plug it in and it's no problem.
Yeah.
But if they don't do that, I gotta have some evidence.
Yeah.
But anyway, just keep that in mind. But Mike, I wanna tell you, this has been a great course. I think it was awesome, and I love your process because the way you did it is way better. I usually do the opposite, the matrix first, but this was way better, for me at least, because you went through all the explanations of the narrative, and then when you got to the matrix, it was just plug and fill in, answer questions. So
Yeah.
just thank you, Mike, for doing it, and
Oh, thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. Well done.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, I hope it helped. I hope, like I said, I hope it helped. And you know, part 2 of this class is, like I said, getting out there and just doing the work. And we do intend to have another class that will deal strictly with elaborate as Jeff did at the beginning, how to prepare for the offer, how to present the offer to the listing agent. If you're a listing agent, how to present it to your seller, how to receive it, how to present the seller counter to your buyer, all the different dialogues and things like that, and staying compliant. And that would be the next piece of it. And thank you all for coming. And I know it's I'm really happy because I thought I was behind on it. So I'm actually.
Hey, Mike.
You can-
Hey, Mike. Yep.
Yeah.
Just can we just ask a real quick question? Something that came up here at the office. On the front where you're marking who the selling or the listing agent is and who the buyer's agent is regarding dual agency. Because how I thought of it was, if somebody like me from this office and then somebody else from the office, they're working on either side, that's dual agency. But
Yes.
where you mark that little box where you mark it as dual agency, if let's say that myself, I had a buyer and then Heraclio had a listing, I was writing an offer on his listing, I'd mark it as dual agency.
That's the only way zip forms lets you do it. It'll yeah. If you put the same brokerage, KW Coastal Estates for the buyer, KW Coastal Estates for the seller, right?
Okay.
No matter who the agents are, it's not going to allow you to say seller only or buyer only. It's going to be both.
Oh, okay.
And technically, it's dual agency, but as far as actually, it's like 2 attorneys in the same office.
Right.
They go against each other all the time. But and sometimes it's a conflict of interest, sometimes it's not. But yeah.
Good. I'm glad you asked because I was wrong.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
One more question, Mike.
Okay.
Jeff.
No, it's all right.
Mike.
Okay,
Oh,
one
sorry,
more question.
Mike, I got a question.
Okay.
4 things to never say.
The 4 things you never say. Okay.
Right. The last one was like the fence line, the property boundary or something to that effect. Right. What is the proper response when somebody asks, like, where does the property boundary end? What should we say instead?
What do you think? You tell me, what do you think you should do?
Well, probably you need to consult a survey. If we don't have a survey on file, then you should go get a survey.
There you go. Ask the seller if they've got any evidence and proof. Otherwise, the survey. That's you have the answer. You have the answer. That was it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. That's the thing. And this is, I'm going to say, and I've said this before, what I really appreciate about our former real estate commissioner for the whole state of California asked me more questions than anyone in this office, not because he doesn't know, but he's confirming. So ask those questions, even if you think you know the answer. If there's any semblance of maybe there's another way, ask it. That's the best way to do it. So, yeah. All right. Any else?
On that vein, I do have another question.
Okay.
So I had a lender tell me that buyer credits. The topic is buyer credit strategy. So the lender had advised one of my buyers, and he said, instead of offering $10,000 less the purchase price, Instead, I recommend asking for a $10,000 credit for closing credit.
Mhm.
And the buyer approached me with that strategy and asked my opinion, and I honestly I wasn't sure
Well, there's
how to respond to that.
yeah, there's pros and cons. You know, they can do that. And what are you going to do with the credit would be the thing, because we need the cash freed up. So there's that. But if the price stays higher, it could make a little higher property tax. If the price stays higher, it's going to be a little bit more transfer fee to the seller, possibly for the county transfer, not a whole lot, maybe a little bit more for the commission, $10,000 more worth of commission. So just look at all the sides, but it just depends. If the buyer wants lower property tax, lower tax base and all that sort of thing, then go with the price. But if they need the cash, go with the credit. Happens all the time. Sometimes realtors will buy for their own account and they'll say, I'll forego commission. Let's just adjust the price. Because the buyer with that higher, here's the other part, that $10,000 that's higher in price, they got to pay interest on that for 30 years. Along with the rest of the note. So there's probably the biggest disadvantages. Now you're getting that, you're taking that 10,000, you're getting it now, you're increasing the amount of your loan that you could have. And whatever, and let's calculate what that interest is over, let's even calculate over 5 years, 10 years. So just tell them all the pros and cons and let them make a decision. Your job is not to make the decision for them ever. Your job is to get them clear, clarify. Their job is that you control the process, they control the decisions. Best way I could say it.
Right. So the 10,000 at closing would essentially be cash in their pocket per se.
It typically goes to, it depends. If it's towards closing costs, then it's going to go to pay for their closing costs, which means that's a check they won't have to write.
Reduces the cash out of pocket.
And
Right.
always check with the lender on any credits.
Okay.
You know, the only credit that they haven't given us a problem with are the commissions. They haven't bothered us when we ask for 2.5%. But when it's a credit to closing costs or any other credit, get with that lender and say, hey, this is how we're going to write it up. And he said, well, that's fine, but write it up this way.
Okay.
So just bring all the people in to the deal that need to come into the deal.